What did Ojukwu really want at Aburi? Was he a secessionist from the start, already determined to break Nigeria apart? Or was he a reluctant nationalist pushed to the edge by fear, betrayal, and collapse? Nearly 60 years later, the Aburi Accord still stands as one of the most disputed moments in Nigerian history. Aburi did not happen by accident. It emerged from a Nigeria shaken by coups, counter-coups, and widespread killings that shattered trust in the state. By the end of 1966, the country was still one nation on paper, but in reality, it was drifting toward fear, suspicion, and regional survival. The January coup had destroyed the old political order, and the July counter-coup deepened the crisis. In the aftermath, violence against Easterners, especially the Igbo, created a sense that the government could no longer guarantee their safety. Refugees poured into the East with stories of abandonment and loss. It was in this atmosphere that Aburi became necessary. Held in Ghana under General Joseph Ankara, the meeting offered neutral ground away from the pressure of Nigeria's internal tensions. For Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, the military governor of the Eastern region, the journey came with hesitation, but also with responsibility. He could not ignore a conference that seemed to promise answers to the fears of his people. Ojukwu did not arrive at Aburi as a man casually chasing independence. He came as someone who believed the crisis required structure, restraint, and protection. His concern was not just political power, but survival. In his view, the real problem was a system that gave too much authority to the center and too little security to the regions. That is why Aburi mattered so much to him. He believed Nigeria needed a new political arrangement, one that made abuse of power harder and forced leaders to act through consultation rather than command. Every clause, every word, every interpretation mattered. Ojukwu understood that once the meeting ended, the struggle would shift from negotiation to meaning. At its core, Aburi was about how power should be shared. Ojukwu supported collective leadership through the Supreme Military Council and resisted the idea of unchecked authority in one central figure. He saw regional autonomy, especially over security, as essential to preventing another wave of violence. To him, this was not disunity. It was the only way to preserve a fragile unity. But the federal leadership in Lagos saw things differently. What Ojukwu viewed as balance, they viewed as weakness. What he called protection, they feared might become fragmentation. That disagreement was always waiting beneath the surface, and it would soon turn into open conflict. The collapse came quickly. After returning to Nigeria, the federal military government issued Decree 8, which Ojukwu believed contradicted the agreement reached at Aburi. To him, this was proof that the meeting had not been a real commitment to reform, but only a temporary pause. Trust broke, and once that happened, the damage was nearly impossible to repair. The failure of Aburi became a turning point. It convinced Ojukwu that peaceful restructuring was no longer possible and helped pave the way for the declaration of Biafra on May 30th, 1967. Whether history sees that decision as inevitable or tragic, it cannot be understood without Aburi. The civil war that followed left deep scars on Nigeria that still linger today. Nearly 6 decades later, the Aburi Accord remains more than a historical event. It is still a symbol of the unresolved debate over federalism, restructuring, and the limits of central power. What Ojukwu wanted at Aburi, at least in the clearest reading, was a Nigeria built on balance, mutual respect, and enough restraint to keep power from becoming fear. In the end, Aburi failed, not because the ideas were meaningless, but because the trust required to make them work was gone. And that is why the question still matters. How do you preserve unity in a diverse country when agreements stop being respected?